Hi, welcome everybody to episode 7 of First Impressions. I'm here as always with my darling friend Maggie, and we
Hi.
today are doing something kind of interesting because the snowstorm has separated us. DC snowstorm has separated us. We are recording this podcast on Google Hangouts on Air. So there's also going to be a YouTube video for anybody who's curious to see us in person. So what you would need to do for that is to go to the First Impressions YouTube channel. And we have a YouTube channel now. We are so high tech.
We're so fancy.
Yes, we are.
So we may be separated by distance and snow, Kristen, but we are never separated in our hearts.
They can't stop us talking about Jane Austen.
Not even if they dump 2 feet of snow on us, can they stop us from talking about Jane Austen.
That's right. That's right. And before we get into today's discussion, which is going to be on Emma, I just first want to thank everybody who is listening to this podcast for listening. This is actually the first episode Maggie and I have recorded since we launched the podcast. All the first 6 episodes were recorded prior to launching and prior to going public. But since we have gone public, I'll just tell you that we have over 300, I think almost 350 now plays and downloads of the podcast. And we have listeners all over the world. We have Austria, New Zealand, and England. And we're huge in Australia. I mean, we have Canadian listeners. And I mean, even within the US, we've got like Idaho. It's like so cool. Every day when I look, because of course I obsessively look, we have new people. And I want to shout out to our newest fan, Alicia, who actually posted on Pemberley.com and the Goodreads group and is promoting us. I love that we have someone who
Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah, somebody we don't know. Like, I don't know this person, but she's still promoting us, which means somebody out there loves listening to me talk about Jane Austen.
I think what happened is my mom probably told her friends at Torah study, and you know how the Jewish network is. So I'm pretty sure that all of our downloads are probably, friends of our moms.
Oh.
But I think that's really exciting that people are listening, even people that we don't know who maybe are also Jane Austen fans. And shout out to Alicia. Hi, Alicia. Thank you for your support.
And I also want to shout out to our 2 friends, Kaylin and Rachel, who are both also huge promoters. And our Mansfield Park episodes actually got Kaylin to read Mansfield Park for the first time.
Kristen, your dream has been realized.
I'm validated. I can die happy now. My purpose on this earth is fulfilled to make.
Okay, well, don't talk about dying happy, because think about how much snow is on your roof right now. And you were worried about it collapsing, so.
Yes, right. So thanks to the fans, and I won't go on too long about them. So today we're going to talk about Emma. Is there anything that you want to? I have a little bit of a plot summary for those who have not read Emma. But was there anything that you wanted to talk about before we dive in, Maggie?
I think that we should mention that Emma is much longer than I remember it being. So for readers who do pick it up, it's not kind of a quick weekend read, maybe like Northanger Abbey would have been, which kind of felt like an extended novella. Emma is a lot to dig into. It's really good, and I hadn't read it since high school, so I'd kind of forgotten how long it is, and so it took me much longer to get through it than I thought. But just it's kind of like a warning to people: don't expect to be able to pick it up and just finish it. But I think you referred to it in an earlier conversation as Jane Austen's masterpiece. Is
Many
what it's
people
referred
see
to
it as her ultimate masterpiece, the most perfect of novels, to quote our friend Arnie, who may join us in our next podcast, or one of our next podcasts. But, I also said to Maggie before we started broadcasting that taking on Emma, I've never felt more nervous to do a podcast than I feel to do this podcast. And I've been thinking about it for days with this sort of anxiety, because it's like going to one of those restaurants where you can order like the however many ounces of steak that's more steak than any one person should ever be able to eat in one sitting. And if you eat it all, you get it free. And they've just set it down in front of me. And I'm thinking, how in the hell am I going to get through all this?
It's like the prime rib challenge.
Yeah.
Can you eat the 50-ounce prime rib? And I mean, I can't imagine you having anxiety about anything, Kristen. That just seems really surprising.
And I'm like, what if I do a bad job? Because before we begin, I will actually say that Mansfield Park is my favorite novel of all time. Emma is a little bit more challenging for me to get into with regard to Austen, almost all the way through the first volume of Emma. It's not published in volumes now, but it was then. I was thinking to myself, like, I almost never pick up this book for pure pleasure the way I do Mansfield Park, because even though it is a masterpiece, it's sort of an anxiety-inducing book for me, and it's all to do with Emma, the main character, and Maggie and I are sort of in agreement. Jane Austen even said, "I'm going to take a heroine which I'm afraid nobody but myself will much like," and Emma is a challenging character to like. And well, where most of Austen's heroines are extremely moral down to their core, Emma's a mean girl. She's a mean girl. She's a plastic, just like what is the movie?
Mean Girls. Oh no, Heathers, right? Wait, I don't know. There's so many like mean girl movies. So when I read Emma, at first, kind of like you were saying, I saw her as a mean girl. I didn't really like her. I think I sent you an email where I described her as an insufferable twat. And to some extent, I still think that's true. But by the end of the book, I did genuinely like her. And we talk about how Jane Austen's characters are relatable hundreds of years later. And after spending time with Emma and seeing how her mind works and how I related to her, the way she responded to things and the way that she talked and made mistakes felt real to me. I remembered what it was like to be that age. And I did genuinely really like her by the end of the book. I did see her as the heroine.
I did too. By the time I was finishing, the book, I was feeling to myself, I'm so sad that this is going to be over. I'm really enjoying this. But she's a challenging heroine, that's for sure. And that's part of what makes the book a masterpiece. And a lot of people think that one of the reasons that people do say the book is a masterpiece is because Austen, even though it sounds like she's an omniscient narrator, she gives us everything. Emma is sort of unconsciously influencing our perspectives. The things that she presents to us as fact, Austen presents to us as fact, actually are the things Emma believes are fact. So that by the time we get to the end and we realize that how wrong Emma really is about everything and how blind she really is to everything, we're shocked. And then on a second reading, we go back and we see things that we never saw before. Because let me explain, maybe now is a good time for a plot summary. So Emma lives at home with her father, who is an invalid. And her brother-in-law, Mr. Knightley, comes to visit them all the time. So they're like a little family unit. Emma tries to play matchmaker. She has just successfully, she thinks, married her governess, who is like a mother to her, to a rich guy who lives down the way, Mr. Weston. So now they're Mr. and Mrs. Weston, and they're sort of like parents to her as well. So she sees herself now as this successful matchmaker, and she makes a new friend, Harriet Smith, her last name is Smith. She is a child of unknown parentage. She's a child out of wedlock. But Emma really likes her. So she's like, I am going to match Harriet with the clergyman of the village, Mr. Elton, which would be a great match for Harriet because he is a member of the landed gentry, just like Edmund. Like if you don't have money, that's what you do. You go into the clergy because it retains your social class. So she wants her friend to have her same social status so they can still be friends. Anyway, she fails utterly to make a match with Mr. Elton because she's so blind to the fact that Mr. Elton actually is trying for her. He's not really in love with her, but he wants to marry her, Emma. And
he wants her money.
He wants her money. And it may be a good time for me to mention that the iconic and brilliant opening line of this book is, Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, Those are the first words, and you get this idea. She seems to unite some of the best blessings in existence. She's too clever for her own good, but she's also handsome and rich, and she's this amazing catch. Anyway, that happens. She utterly fails to match Elton and Harriet, and in so doing, she actually sort of ruins Harriet's prospects by telling her not to accept a farmer, Robert Martin, who's a really nice guy.
Oh, Robert Martin.
I know, really in love with Harriet. And this all happens in the first volume. And you get more and more frustrated with Emma because she's clearly pulling them apart. Harriet and Robert Martin would be a great match, and they obviously do have affection for each other. But Emma's like, no, if you marry this farmer, you can't be my friend anymore because, we're a different social class then.
I'll never be able to come call on you or visit you. And
yeah, and she's so selfishly, that's what Maggie said when she described Emma as a selfish twat, is the selfishness that her wanting Harriet for her own friend and destroying her prospects. Mr. Knightley, Emma's older brother-in-law, has always been a mentor and sees himself as sort of a guardian to her. And when he finds out what she has done, he is furious. Okay, so then
Robert Martin, I believe, is one of Mr. Knightley's tenants, I guess you would say.
Yes.
So he knows him, and despite the fact that he is just kind of a lowly farmer, Mr. Knightley very much respects Robert Martin, sees him as very sensible, thinks it would have been a great match, and so he's definitely upset with Emma for getting in the way.
And in talking about this book, we have to talk about the amazing 1996 adaptation with Gwyneth Paltrow.
I lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I lost you for a second. You're back.
In talking about this book, we also have to talk about the amazing 1996 adaptation with Gwyneth Paltrow, who, if you're trying to understand the character of Emma, the real life Gwyneth Paltrow is
oh my God, I know.
Emma.
No, it's so true. Like, she didn't even have to act. It's basically Emma is the most Gwyneth that ever Gwynethed a Gwyneth. It's like, if Emma was a teenager today, right, she would totally have a blog in a lifestyle website where she told everyone she knew how they should live their life, where to get the best locally sourced kale. She would absolutely be Gwyneth Paltrow. Absolutely.
She really would. And as you know, Clueless is an adaptation of Emma. And so if you've seen Clueless, just think of Cher. She's this totally, space cadet, superficial, sort of trendy girl. But in the 1996 adaptation of the original, which stars Gwyneth and Jeremy Northam as Mr. Knightley, there is this scene where they're arguing about Harriet and Robert Martin, where the filmmakers did something very clever, and they have them both shooting arrows. They're doing archery, like they're doing archery practice is a fun little thing to do.
Oh, we're getting a Kevin photobomb in the background.
Yeah, I had to close the door. I was like, if you're going to be naked, I'll close the door,
I'm sure the people listening to this on the podcast are now very disappointed that they did not take out
they can't be what am I trying to say? Voyeurs into our lives of nakedness around the home. Yeah, but they're doing archery practice, and Emma, as she's arguing with Jeremy Northam, starts to shoot wilder and wilder shots, and because she's really wrong, her logic is wrong, and Mr. Knightley is there to tell her, like, it's not a degradation for illegitimacy and ignorance to marry a respected, intelligent farmer. And she's like,
yeah.
It'd be a degradation for her to marry someone who I could not even admit as my own acquaintance. Mm-hmm. And then he says, men of sense, whatever you may say, do not want silly wives. And he lets the arrow go. It's really a funny scene. But if you've ever seen the poster for that movie, it's her holding a bow and arrow. And actually in the book, there's a mention of an arrow too, but I won't get away from ourselves. So back to the plot summary. Mr. Elton is extremely offended when he proposes to Emma and finds that all along she was trying to match him up with this girl of uncertain origin, and he's extremely offended by that. He goes away to Bath. He brings a wife back, Mrs. Elton.
Lord.
And Lord is such a funny character. She is one of Austen's finest comic creations. And she's a real bitch. I mean, she comes back and she and Emma are immediately at loggerheads, and they're always sniping at Emma and trying to put her down. So it makes Emma's social situation very uncomfortable in that way. Meantime, a new guy comes into the neighborhood, and his name is Frank Churchill, and he is the son of Mr. Weston. So he's sort of like an extended, sort of like, he's not a family member, but they're obviously both related to people who love each other. And therefore, everybody's sort of thinking in their mind that Frank Churchill is a perfect husband for Emma. And
we should mention that despite the fact they've never met him in person, he was the son of Mr. Weston's late wife and was raised with her parents. So, but Mr. Weston has talked of him constantly to everyone. Everybody knows about Frank Churchill. Everybody knows the details of him. And so, but they've never met him in person.
He's sort of larger than life.
Right. He's kind of been built up as this amazing person, even though no one has met him at all in the neighborhood.
And Emma loves this idea in her mind of a man coming to town and falling in love with her and thinking she's amazing. And on the surface of things in the book, that's sort of what happens. And you think that's the way the story might go, that she might fall in love with Frank Churchill. But as the story goes along, she realizes more and more that she doesn't really care about him and that they're just really good friends. But he is a flirt. So they are constantly flirting in public. Okay. Meantime, a woman comes into their social circle, Jane Fairfax. And Frank Churchill is always sort of saying mean things about Jane Fairfax. Jane Fairfax is a poor woman who has coming to stay with her aunt and her grandmother, the Bateses. And they're all in the same social circle together. But Emma hates Jane Fairfax. And why? It's for the same reason. Everybody in town is always talking about Jane Fairfax as this young person who sort of belongs to the town. And I have a great quote in here about Jane Fairfax. Where is it? You can talk while I'm looking for it.
Oh, okay. I don't really have anything interesting to say at this point. No. So basically, Emma's kind of jealous of Jane Fairfax. And to be fair, she does acknowledge that Jane Fairfax is very elegant and very intelligent. But Jane Fairfax is always getting sick all the time. And she's just kind of a stick in the mud. She's not really a super interesting conversationalist. So, I mean, I saw the fact that Emma wasn't besties with her as there was certainly some jealousy involved there. But, I mean, she just never really... She wasn't a sparkling personality.
This is the quote from Emma talking about Jane Fairfax and why they're not friends. I have known her from a child, undoubtedly. We have been children and women together. It is natural to suppose that we should be intimate and that we should have taken to each other whenever she visited her aunt. But we never did. I hardly know how it has happened, a little perhaps from that wickedness on my side, which was prone to take disgust towards a girl so idolized and so cried up as she always was by aunt and grandmother and all their set. And then her reserve. I could never attach myself to anyone so completely reserved. And there's another passage too where she's talking to Harriet where she says this, and I love this passage as well. She says, one is sick of the very name of Jane Fairfax. Every letter from her is read 40 times over. Her compliments to all friends go round and round again. And if she does but send her aunt and the pattern of a stomacher or knit a pair of garters for her grandmother, one hears of nothing else for a month. I wish Jane Fairfax very well, but she tires me to death. And one thing that is not helping is that Mr. Knightley, this brother-in-law, who's, by the way, 16 years older than Emma and sees himself sort of as a guardian of Emma, he loves Jane Fairfax and thinks she is, I'm going to borrow a phrase from Mansfield Park, Mr. Knightley thinks Jane Fairfax is the perfect model of a woman. And what Mr. Knightley tries to do with Emma is to encourage her to be more like Jane Fairfax. So that, of course, also makes Emma very pissed off. And
he ever actually explicitly say that to her?
He doesn't say perfect model of a woman, but he does.
No, I mean, does he ever say you should be more like Jane Fairfax?
Yes, I think there's a passage where he explicitly says that. And it's it's pretty obvious throughout the story. He slobbers all over her all the time. Oh, Jane, oh, it's such a pity she doesn't have a pianoforte. She plays so well. And oh, I'm so concerned for her health. And Emma, you should be friends with Jane. Why aren't you more friends with Jane? And, unlike Fanny Price, Emma refuses to be molded by him, the wiser, older, guidant man in her life. She breaks out of the Pygmalion story and challenges him at every turn and really is his intellectual equal rather than someone he's molding. But I'm getting away from myself. So just to finish out the story, what ultimately happens is that Emma is blindsided when she finds out that all this time Frank Churchill, who's supposed to love her, has actually been secretly engaged to Jane Fairfax the whole time. It's been an utter secret because Jane Fairfax is not rich, and he's afraid that his rich aunt will disown him for loving a woman who's lower than he is in social class. So they're keeping apart. Jane and Frank keep apart in public. Frank is always saying really shitty things about Jane, sometimes in her hearing. And when you find this out, you're like...
Shamelessly with Emma.
What's that?
Shamelessly with Emma to kind of make sure nobody knows about him and Jane.
Yeah, he's so over the top and pretending, and he doesn't have to be. If he just acted normal around them both, nobody would have suspected him, but he decides to go over the top and, flirt with Emma. And then Emma comes to her own realization that all along she has been in love with Mr. Knightley. Surprise! She's trying to matchmake with all these other people, and it turns out she was blind to her own love all along. And there are many dramatic events that happen that I'm not going to explain because, we can't get into the whole plot at the beginning of the podcast. But there are many dramatic sort of climactic moments that come along here. And another thing is Emma thinks at the very end that Mr. Knightley might love Harriet. And that's when she realizes, no, Mr. Knightley must marry nobody but me. And she realizes that she loves Mr. Knightley. So it took that attempt at, matching him up with somebody else to make her realize, oh my God, no, I love him. If you've ever seen Clueless, it's the scene where Alicia Silverstone goes, oh my God, I love Josh. Yeah.
Isn't she standing in front of a big fountain too at that point that explodes up right when she has this huge realization in her mind?
And that's the passage to bring it full circle where it says it darted through her with the speed of an arrow. And that's why they're calling back to that, those filmmakers in that poster. So that is the overarching plot summary. And that's a very high altitude one. But if we tried to read you a full plot summary, it would take 5-10 minutes because it's very detailed. But I think we did a pretty good job of introducing all of the characters in high altitude. And one thing we didn't talk about, and I wanted to talk about today, is who these characters are in more detail, because that's where the comedy of the book comes in. With all of these characters, they all have their little vanities and their little quirks, and Austen draws them out. And in all her dialogue, it's really funny because she's just highlighting the way that people are, the vain, stupid things they obsess about. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. Was there something you wanted to?
No, it's fine. I'm just enjoying listening to you.
Oh, okay.
I'm also worried that if I try to jump in too many times, it's going to completely freeze our feed.
Oh, so. Yeah. Don't let me take away from what you have to say. If you want to talk, you should just wave your hand.
Oh no, I won't. Don't worry.
Okay. Okay. Good. So let's start out and let's go back to volume 1. And I was saying it's very hard to like Emma. Austen knows that it's very hard to like Emma in volume 1. And so what she does at the very, very beginning is she talks about Emma's relationship to her father, because that's where we see the glimmer of goodness in Emma, and that's where we get on her side, hopefully, and bear with her through her selfish behavior. And her father, Mr. Woodhouse, is extremely anxious. He has he's older, and she's the younger daughter, and he has sort of a childlike mind. And it says explicitly, he could not meet her in conversation, rational or playful. she's sort of a caretaker, and there's actually sort of a theory out there. Somebody is writing, and her name escapes me. There's a New York Times article about it. Just Google Austen and Alzheimer's, and this New York Times will come up, where this woman sees Emma as a caretaker for her father, and how that sort of is hard on her, and how she's suffering because she has to spend every evening of her life playing backgammon and handling every tiny little thing that might upset him. And she really manages him. She really makes sure that nothing comes in to upset him. And that's where you start to love her. And
they definitely have a caretaker relationship. I read that article, and I kind of disagree with the central idea that Mr. Woodhouse has Alzheimer's or some kind of dementia, because I saw him more as just having a crippling anxiety disorder. I mean, he's able to remember exact dates of a letter that he read. He can't remember, the finishing of a limerick that he knows was really clever, but it doesn't seem like his memory is really that impaired. It's just a matter of, oh, we'll always get a chill, or I don't like any change, or if we all go out, we could get caught in the snow. It's just kind of worst case scenario is always where he immediately goes. But she is certainly a caretaker for him, and certainly sacrifices a lot of her own kind of social opportunities to remain with him.
Yes. And I think and there's one passage too, and I should add at this point that Mr. Knightley, her brother-in-law who she falls in love with, he's over there all the time. He knows what she has to go through, and he helps her in so many ways to manage him. And that's where you start to love him too, because he's in all the way and trying to help this older man not be anxious. And there's one passage where they're with Mr. Woodhouse, who, by the way, is still an owner of landed property and is still essentially, supposed to be running his farmers and whatever. Maybe they don't have any farmers, but he sort of still has to take care of his own personal business, but he can't. His mind is too weak. So they actually describe talking him. They say Mr. Woodhouse was talked into what was necessary, told he understood, and the papers swept away. And you just see Emma and Knightley managing him that way, and they're on the same wavelength. And that's where you start to see them. And, all through the rest of what happens with Harriet Smith, I mean, when Emma takes Harriet into her own life and her own confidence, Harriet is dumb as a box of rocks. I mean, she is dumb. But she worships Emma. She absolutely worships Emma. And when you start to hate Emma is when Emma becomes obsessed with having Harriet as her little, her mini-me. Because... Yeah. But, an argument could be made that she needs that companionship, and she doesn't want to be challenged because she's always challenged with her father, where she really should be making friends with Jane Fairfax. In Mr. Knightley's opinion, Jane Fairfax is an extremely elegant, refined, intelligent woman who has all these accomplishments, and Emma sort of hates her for it, and she hates that Jane Fairfax takes attention away from her. Right. But really, Jane Fairfax is her intellectual equal. And, you sort of hate her for neglecting Jane Fairfax, who is stuck at home with her aunt and her grandmother.
Well, not to get too far afield, because I think you wanted to go in and talk about Harriet a bit. But the thing is with Jane Fairfax, she has very little actual dialogue in the book. We almost never actually hear her speak to anyone directly until the very end. And if she is, it's usually like, no, I'm not feeling well, I'm just gonna go home. So we just kind of hear secondhand all the time about how awesome Jane Fairfax is. But personally, for me as a reader, there's not a lot of evidence of that in the book. I mean, yes, she does sing and play the piano beautifully when they have people over one evening, but there's really no kind of textual support for the idea that Jane Fairfax is this epitome of womanhood, of Regency womanhood. Just always, getting sick and having a fever and having to go walk home. And
yes. Yeah, we are told time and time again. And, to be honest, it becomes kind of annoying to me too, because we're both like, well, she's not that great. Like,
Yeah.
I think we both came away with that
Well, what's
impression.
so great about Jane Fairfax? Why don't you just go marry Jane Fairfax? Oh, wait.
Right. Which is exactly exactly what we came away with, how we felt when we came away from the book. We became Emma a little bit in just reading it. And so Mr. Woodhouse, his childlike dialogue is a little bit of a source of comedy in the book, just because he's so nervous, and that's his quirk.
It's like the middle of June and they want to go for a walk or something, and he's worried that they'll catch a chill.
Right. He has a fire every
Yeah.
like Midsummer's Eve, and he's got a fire going. And another source of comedy, very memorable comedy in this book, is Jane Fairfax's aunt, Miss Bates. And I have a copy of Emma somewhere where I think it's Eudora Welty's quoted on the jacket as saying, "That quintessential bore, Miss Bates." And I think everybody knows a Miss Bates in their lives. She's a great talker upon small matters. And she just...
What is great about Miss Bates, sorry, Kristen, it's hard to tell when you're stopping with the video. When you're reading it, her instances of dialogue will last page after page after page with no room for breath, just jumping from topic to topic. It's even reading it is hilarious and exhausting. Just to see it on the page is very amusing. And you can definitely picture in your head this kind of, old maid type of character who just every thought she has just comes spilling out of her, and she just goes on and on and on, and it's inoffensive, everything she says, but it's just so much.
So boring. And Emma gets, tries to be nice to her, but she gets really irritated being around her because she doesn't let anybody else talk. She just goes on and on. And at the climax, one of the emotional climaxes of the book, Emma loses her cool over it. And we won't talk about that too much, but I have a little...
Emma could not resist.
Emma could not resist making a joke at this woman's expense. And it's a little, joke at somebody's expense. And that's what's amazing about Austen, is these little tiny social moments can become huge turning points in the book. But I marked out, I actually tried to read this out loud earlier because I wanted to give people a sample of Miss Bates's dialogue. So I marked out some of it. And it's my favorite one. She's talking about, "For would you believe it, Miss Woodhouse, there he is in the most obliging manner in the world, fastening in the rivet of my mother's spectacles. The rivet came out, this morning. So very obliging, for my mother had no use of her spectacles, could not put them on. And by the by, everybody ought to have 2 pair of spectacles. They should indeed. Jane said so. I meant to take them over to John Saunders the first thing I did, but something or other hindered me all the morning. First one thing, then another. There is no saying what, At one time, Patty came to say that she thought the kitchen chimney wanted sweeping. 'Oh,' said I, 'Patty, do not come to me with your bad news. Here is the rivet of your mistress's spectacles come out.'" And I love, "Patty, do not come to me with your bad news." Like, she has to repeat every conversation she has. Yeah, she has to repeat every conversation she has to other people right after she has had it. And there is another amazing thing where she is talking to somebody out the window and they have a whole conversation, and she turns around to the room and tells them everything that was just said, and they could hear it perfectly. And that's a Mr. Knightley moment that I have set aside to talk about Mr. Knightley. But that's Miss Bates, the quintessential bore, and it's a huge comedic part. And we were talking earlier about how pacing, the idea of pacing and comedic timing is different. And for readers of this age who pick up Emma of this day and age, might struggle with it a little bit. But as long as you can adjust to that rhythm of the book, it is truly very funny. I still find it very funny.
Mm-hmm. I agree. No, I absolutely agree. And like I said, even visually, it's funny when you see just how long her speeches go on and on. I think at some point I would flip to see how long. I'm like, oh my God. How long is she going to talk about these stupid spectacles? Okay, Frank Churchill's fixing the spectacles. We get it.
And
This is really necessary.
at some point later in that dialogue, they get interrupted, and then Miss Bates goes, "What was I saying?" And it says, "Emma wonders what of all the medley she would fix on."
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, where is she going with this? She actually takes Harriet to Miss Bates's house when Harriet can't stop talking about her broken heart with Mr. Elton. She's like, "There's some place I know where you won't be able to talk about Mr. Elton indeed, you will not be able to talk at all," or whatever. I think that might be from the movie and not the book. Sometimes they do with this.
Well, speaking of the movie, I want to mention that Mr. Elton is played by Alan Cumming.
Yes.
Who is an amazing actor, if someone is not familiar with him. But he just does he just totally has this great kind of oiliness to him, I guess is just kind of the word I can come up with, where it's just very off-putting. And in my head, I usually don't see film versions of characters in my head when I read the book, but for me, I definitely see Alan Cumming as Mr. Elton.
And what I will say about the film adaptation, it's beloved by a lot of people. I love it. Have seen it more times than I've read the book, and sometimes the two get blended in my head as well. One of the triumphs of that adaptation is almost all of the dialogue came out of the book. A lot of it has been shortened or slightly shortened, but all the jokes are the same as in the book, are very similar as in the book. And that faithfulness, I think, is what makes the movie so good, because there are so many laugh lines in the book that stay in the movie.
Right.
And it really translates it very well.
I agree too. So much of the movie, to me, comes off as kind of overly precious at times.
Oh, it can be a little Hollywood, especially at the end.
And, Gwyneth, and it's just a lot of it is just kind of eye roll inducing for me now that I think we have a lot of better adaptations. Like we were talking about in our previous episode, Northanger Abbey remains one of my favorites, and it feels the most real. But it is very very loyal to the book.
And I think you're probably right, actually, that someone coming in and seeing Emma for the first time and not having any background would find it a little precious. I think you're right. And I think it's one of those instances where, having seen it when I was in like the 8th grade, and it just becomes your favorite. You just love whatever adaptation you start out being obsessed with. But and it does get very sappy and romantic in the end, which is one of its failings. And there's some unfortunate lines that Austen didn't write that are very Hollywood and that just make you facepalm because they're so bad. But what was I going to say? Well, darn it.
Now you're thinking about Alan Cumming and you forgot everything you were going to talk about.
What were we I'm just like,
well, we were kind of going through the secondary characters. I think we were talking about Miss Bates.
Oh yeah, right. There's some moments of the adaptation that are just so good, though. I was watching it the other night, and I got
it's been on HBO regularly lately.
Yes,
I really strange. As I've been reading the book, Emma has been airing like every day on HBO.
Really?
It's really coincidental. Yeah, I don't know why they just suddenly started airing it again, but it's really been a big coincidence.
The lady who plays Miss Bates in the adaptation, I will never be able to not see her either, because she does a fantastic job, and she is really funny.
Well, to talk about Miss Bates, and kind of like you were saying about why you like the actress who plays her so much, the thing about Miss Bates is, yes, she does talk a lot, and she doesn't have a lot of interesting things to say, but she is just a really sweet, nice, really wonderful person. I mean, things that she says are kind of very inconsequential, but it doesn't change the fact that she's a wonderful person. She never says anything bad about someone. She only talks good about people when she goes on and on and on. And she just is kind of a delightful character, especially as a reader. If you kind of don't want to read through everything, you're like, okay, you kind of skip second page of her speeches. But she feels like a fully realized person, and she is just a really nice lady. And that's why when Emma does make a very cheap joke at her expense, it is such a faux pas, and she's taken to task for it because this woman is so nice that to make a joke at her expense is so cruel, and she takes it so to heart. Miss Bates does, and you just feel so bad. It's kind of like she's annoying, but you can see yourself being mean to her. It's like kicking a puppy. It's like a puppy, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean to pee everywhere, but it's so cute. It's just so adorable.
That's true. I think that's true. And I actually marked out a passage where Emma makes fun of her to Mrs. Weston and starts talking in her voice and saying, "Oh, all our petticoats are so strong." And Mrs. Weston says, "Do not mimic her, Emma. You divert me against my conscience. Like, we should be nice to her." And Mrs. Weston sort of was a mother figure to Emma, but she's like Dion in Clueless, where Emma's so smart and so clever and has such strength of personality that Mrs. Weston is almost like a secondary friend who sort of follows Emma. And that's why Knightley is important in Emma's life, because he's the only one who is willing to tell her when she steps out of line. And we'll get to him in just a second. But first, we have to talk.
I think they explicitly say in the book too. I can't remember if it's Knightley or Mrs. Weston who actually comes out and says it, where basically she was never really much of a governess. She was never really able to get Emma to do all her reading and do her writing and do her studies, because Emma was basically already operating at a higher kind of activity and intellectual level than her, even when she was employed as her governess. I think she kind of, obviously she was dealing with a child and she was an adult, so there was something there. But when it came to actually, Emma, you should really make sure he is like, I'm going to go over here. Like, okay. She didn't really try very hard to rein her in as a governess.
There's a line in I forget if it's in the book now. The movie and the book gets so blended, and I wish I could quote this book like I can quote Mansfield Park, but I actually can't. There's some line where it's like, she won't be urging me to better myself anymore. Now she's gone and married. And he says, that should not matter, as you just, Knightley says, that should not matter, as you always did, just as you pleased.
Yeah, like why should this be any different? I love how her father, despite the fact that through the events of the book happened over a year, I think, he still refers to Mrs. Weston as Miss Taylor. Oh, poor Miss Taylor. Because she had to leave Hartfield.
Yeah.
She married a man that she loves and now has her own home and is very happy, but she'll still always be poor Miss Taylor.
He can't see it that way because he's so childlike. There's one more thing we have to talk about, and then I really, really, really am excited to talk about Emma and Mr. Knightley. But first, we really have to briefly just mention that in the movie, Ewan McGregor plays Frank Churchill, and the wig.
The wig is awful.
My God. The
wig is awful. And it's not just the wig. It's also, if you have seen Moulin Rouge, you know that at times Ewan McGregor can be very toothy. Do you know what I mean? Like when he sings, it's not like, when he sings like all his tears. If you're watching the video, you can see me making the face. Frank Churchill smiles all the time. And I basically just want to punch him in the face.
Yeah, he's a very punchable face. And he is almost oily, like Mr. Elton is oily. When he is pretending to be sort of falling in love with Emma, he actually does some pretty showy, peacocky stuff. For example, Emma is playing the piano and singing. And halfway through the song,
and just joins.
He gets up, comes in and sings the second verse and comes to stand by her, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's so cute."
No, in the movie, it's just ridiculous because it's Ewan McGregor, and he just looks ridiculous when he sings. And it's so in the book, it's not really. It's just like, oh, it was really nice. He has a great voice. In the movie, it's kind of like a much bigger deal in my mind because he's just so ridiculous looking that I just can't get. I'm like, I can't watch. It's like watching one of The Office, where you just can't. It's too weird.
And he is such a disgusting character too.
Really? Okay, so this is, I don't know. We disagree on Frank Churchill
No, I
then.
have a quote for you. Okay, and you're going to realize. So when I was going back through this
Okay.
book, you're going to realize. And so when you're going back, when I was going back through this book, it's like when you read it at the time, you're just seeing him as Frank Churchill, unengaged guy. But he actually says a lot of mean stuff about Jane Fairfax, his secret fiance, in her hearing. And now she's a sensitive person who wants to do right. She knows she's violated a code of honor by consenting to a secret engagement. And what's even worse about it is that they're pulling the wool all over everybody's eyes. Every people that they love, they're pretending in front of them. And she feels terrible about it. But he is such it's a sort of untethered from morality that he gets a real kick out of it. He thinks it's really
Okay, but when you're done reading it, I do have a rebuttal.
Okay, but let me read
it. In
it.
defense of Frank Churchill. I'm going to write a thesis paper and call it In Defense of Frank Churchill.
Well, and we have to remember, too.
I'm just going to drink my wine.
That Emma.
Where's your wine, Kristen?
I'm not drinking wine. Yeah, sorry. I didn't even think of it. And then we got on the call and I was like, oh, damn.
This is what happens when I'm not there with you. You stay sober. Yeah. And it's going to be much less interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Sadly. But I won't laugh quite as hard. And so I won't have quite as much editing to do where I have to cut out 5-10 seconds of laughter where nothing is happening.
Okay, well, I'm going to refill while you're looking for it.
Okay. Damn it. I have so much stuff. Oh. One of the things that happens, okay, is that, here. They are, what you need to know about Emma and Jane Fairfax is that Emma dislikes Jane Fairfax enough to speculate some things about her that are very not nice. And one of the things Emma speculates is that Jane Fairfax actually came back to Highbury, to stay with her aunt, instead of going to Ireland with the rest of her family, because her adoptive sister has just gotten married to a man, Mr. Dixon. Mr. Dixon. And Emma believes, she has a cute little theory, because she's this matchmaker type, that Jane Fairfax has fallen in love with her, with Miss Campbell's husband, Mr. Dixon, Mrs. Dixon's husband, right? And rather than go to Ireland to see his ancestral home, she can't do it because she's so in love with him. And Emma is such a little bitch. She is such a little gossipy bitch that she actually says this to Frank Churchill. She's like, oh my God, I have a theory and it's so bad. And he's like, I love that theory, right? Because it is more cover for him being secretly engaged to her. He's like, that is hilarious and I love it. And he takes every opportunity to tease Jane Fairfax about it with Emma. He and Emma team up and they're the mean girls, and they drop the name Mr. Dixon around Jane Fairfax, who gets very upset, not because she's in love with Mr. Dixon, but because her fiance is being shitty to her and pretending to sort of be with Emma. And it's awful. It's torture for her. And I have one passage where I just think that the awfulness comes out so well. And it's 19. Come on, 19. All right. So in this scene, one of the things Frank Churchill does is he orders a piano to be delivered anonymously to Jane Fairfax's house so she can play the piano, because he knows she loves to play the piano and the Bateses are too poor.
And she's apparently really, really good. I mean, basically they talk about the Regency era version of she should go on American Idol. Like everyone thinks she's really, really good.
Amazing singer. So Emma and Frank are sitting there, and there Jane is playing an Irish melody, right? And they turn to each other, and Frank says, I'm so glad you told me about Jane Fairfax and her secret love for Mr. Dixon, because now I have a key to all her odd looks and all her odd ways. Leave shame to her. If she does wrong, she ought to feel shame. And that shame is about the fact that they just mentioned Mr. Dixon to her. And
Right.
Emma's like, no, don't do that. Don't upset her. I feel bad about it. And Frank's like, if she's done wrong, she should feel it. Well, he's the one who's doing wrong with her. They're engaged together. And that's such a horrible thing to say, because she does feel shame every day. And so for him to like throw it in her face as though he's this pure, perfect guy, if she does wrong, she should feel it. And that to me is, he's so gross. It's so awful that he said that.
Okay, so here's my rebuttal. I feel like everything that Frank Churchill says when they are in large group situations, I'm sure when he's at home with the Westons, he just kind of is more himself. Everything that he says and everything that he says and does is basically an act that he has to wear all the time. So no one will ever suspect that he and Jane are in love and have been engaged. And once you remember that basically his grandmother on his mother's side, Mrs. Churchill, is basically this Iron Maiden, horrible, controlling person. That's why they had to become secretly engaged. Because his family would not approve. His family would not have given their consent. I mean, the implication is he would have been disinherited. They would have no living. So even if they did get married, they'd be poor and they'd be miserable. So everything that he does, from my perspective, is he's just trying to make sure that no one suspects and no one finds out. And so it's an act.
What's not okay is that he's having fun with it. And there's another scene where they're all putting, they're playing with the alphabet. One of the kids that stays at Emma's house, her nieces and nephews, are playing with the alphabets and putting together word puzzles for each other. So they're making a word and then mixing up the letters and then pushing it over to someone else to see if they can figure out what the word is, like a jumble. And so Frank Churchill makes a jumble out of the word Dixon. And he says to Emma, I'm going to give this to Jane Fairfax. Let's see how she behaves. And Emma's like, no, for shame, you should not. And Jane's right there. She can hear them laughing about it. She knows exactly. And he pushes a word to her and she sees that it's Dixon and she goes red, like she's so ashamed for the deception. And he didn't need to do it. It was totally unnecessary to prolong this joking thing with Emma. He doesn't have to bring it up at all. I mean, and I don't know. It's such a mean girl thing to do. That's the worst
I take your
moment
point. I take your point. But I just feel like I don't dislike him as much as you do. I'm not really sure why. I mean, it's not his fault that Jane Fairfax's reaction to their having this secret engagement is to be sick all the time and not want to talk and be interesting. Like, that's not his fault that her reaction is to beat herself. And this must be like a difference in culture where I don't really understand why it's so shameful to have this secret engagement. But it's just kind of like he's just trying to not have people figure it out so they can be happy one day. He buys her this huge and expensive pianoforte. It's not his fault that she reacts to having to keep this secret by becoming a total dish rag. It's not.
Yeah.
Yes, he does enjoy it. But I mean, Kristen, this is the thing. I try not to judge characters like this too harshly because I know that I have certain friends that I get around and we just talk shit the whole time and it's fun. Sometimes being the mean girl is fun. You don't do it in front of other people when they can hear you. I mean, that is definitely rude. But again, it's all part of the ruse. He needs people to think that he really doesn't like her. So I have friends I get around with and we make really awful, mean jokes and it's fun and it's just kind of
about me.
Yes.
About me.
No, of course not, Kristen. You're the one that I get together with and make mean jokes about other people.
Well, I have to say your version of mean must not be very mean because I don't remember you doing that to anybody.
No, maybe it's just in my head then. But I just Frank Churchill, in my mind, the only person that he ever seems to really disparage is Jane Fairfax. And it's interesting that to you, that's kind of the most harsh thing because he is in love with her. But to me, it's kind of the only forgivable one. He doesn't make fun of Miss Bates. He doesn't make fun of her mother, who's, you know, of Mr. Woodhouse. You know, he doesn't make fun of people unless it's part of his act. He really needs people to think that he doesn't care for Jane Fairfax. And when he finds out, I mean, you find out at the end when all is revealed that Jane Fairfax thinks that he really is in love with Emma and that she accepts the position as a governess at an estate. She basically dumps him because he has been so cruel, and she's going to go off. And he doesn't know about it. There's some kind of miscommunication. This book is full of miscommunications. He doesn't, but as soon as he finds out that she really means to end their engagement and take a position as a governess, he flies out the door and rides all night to go to her, and the truth comes out. And so I think it's clear he passionately loves her. He's just trying to make sure nobody knows. I'll forgive a lot.
For love, you know, yes. And at the end, you know, it does come out, and he's, yeah, I know what you mean. I get it.
So let me ask you a question though. The reason why he is able to come to her side and the truth comes out is because Mrs. Churchill, his grandmother, has died.
Right.
Very suddenly and conveniently. So I think though that if she hadn't died and he hadn't inherited everything and then was able to marry Jane Fairfax, he wouldn't have been able to go to her, and she would have just become a governess. And she would now be living, well, not now, obviously, it's 200 years later, but she would then have just gone and been living, taking care of these rich, spoiled kids the rest of her life.
Eventually, probably, yes. But she was going to put it off for like another, you know, couple of months at least.
But because she dumped him, she accepted it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, and Mrs. Elton, this horrible character who we sort of haven't gotten into too much, sort of forces it onto her. Mrs. Elton is a really bossy witch who sort of adopts Jane Fairfax, and she's like, I'm going to get you this most amazing position as a governess. And even though Jane says time and time again, like, no, I'm not ready, I don't want to, this woman is so pushy. And she's a conceited, vain character. And one of the funniest things about her is her conversational flourishes, because she thinks she's so witty and cute that when she comes from Bath with Mr. Elton and they're married and she comes into society, her dialogue is hysterical. And it's hysterical in the book and in the movie, where she talks about Mr. Elton, but rather than just saying Mr. Elton or my husband, she always refers to him as Mr. E. Oh, Mr. E. I mean,
oh my God, she's like Harley Quinn in the Batman. Mr. J, where she always calls the Joker Mr. J.
Or she says, my caro sposo, like in Italian, right? Or she said, oh, my lord and master, I must ask my lord and master. And she thinks she's so cute every time she says it, Mr. E. And
so this is, I think that one of the great things about Emma is that you were saying in volume 1, Emma is basically the mean girl, right? It's kind of hard to like her in volume 1. Once you meet Mrs. Elton and you see what a real mean girl is like, because she is.
Yes.
She absolutely is. She comes in and she basically tries to hijack the social circle of the neighborhood. She knows what's best. Her family is at Maple Grove and is rich and does everything appropriately. She's the real mean girl. So once you meet Mrs. Elton, you're like, well, Emma's fucking amazing.
Yeah, comparison. That's true. She does come out very well in comparison. Yeah. She does. She's not overly familiar and
doesn't she refer to Mr. Knightley as just Knightley, and
yes.
Emma is like, what? Excuse me? Excuse Knightley, not Mr. Knightley or even George, but just Knightley. Like, who the hell do you think you are, woman? It's great. I kind of wanted them to have a cat fight. It would have been amazing.
that's one of the funniest parts of the movie, and I still to this day laugh so hard when I watch the movie at that part, and because they did take it almost verbatim and put it in the movie, and I couldn't figure out how to do it for Hangouts on Air, but
Kristen, you're really making me want to watch the movie tonight.
I really wanted to, yeah, I watched it last night, and I really wanted to splice in at least that clip because it's so funny. Yeah, but so it goes like this. So Mrs. Elton is seated on a divan talking to Miss Woodhouse. It's the first time that they've met. She's just moved into the neighborhood, and she says to Emma, she says, "Oh, we were at the Westons. Guess who came in when we were there?" And Emma's like, "I cannot imagine." And Mrs. Elton's like, "Knightley." Emma goes, "Knightley?" "Knightley, Mr. E's friend." Oh, quite the gentleman.
Yeah. And then she's also shot like, "Oh, you had to." Oh, and Emma definitely. This is one of the hints that Emma might have stronger feelings for him than she lets on. The narrator lets on. Her reaction to that, like needing to meet him and spend time with him to understand that he was a gentleman. Like to Emma, he is the epitome of the Regency man. And so the idea that someone would discount him or consider him as worth less than he is, or not worth the maximum amount of respect, is like completely shocking. And she takes great offense on his behalf.
Let's talk about them. Let's talk about Emma and Knightley and wind up, because I don't know how long we've been going on. This is not showing me how long we've been talking.
Yeah, it's almost 5 o'clock now. So we've definitely been talking for over an hour.
Okay. Man,
I thought you wanted to save them. I thought you wanted to save them for a whole episode.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
How would you feel about talking about some of the broader themes of the book? Because there's a lot of really interesting stuff about social class and wealth.
Yes.
That I would actually think would be really interesting to talk about.
And we have to
and the narrator. We should talk more about the idea of the narrator, like you were saying.
And we have to talk about the two climactic scenes, the one where Knightley leads Harriet to dance, and Box Hill with the insults, and we really need to treat those in depth.
Well, I think we're definitely going to get 3 episodes out of Emma.
Yes. Okay, so then let's wrap up today with the promise of discussing Knightley and Emma and their love, right. And why you can get invested in it, and just the realness. I'll leave you with this thought, that the realness of the people that we're laughing at here, the realness of Miss Bates, the realness of everybody, and the realness of Knightley and Emma that we're going to talk about. We talked a little bit about their accord, their perfect wavelength, where they're both working to make Mr. Woodhouse comfortable. This is what I was thinking, and it goes.
Drink my wine. If we're wrapping up, I need to drink all my wine.
Yes. It goes to this. Okay, I will just very quickly say, there is this scene that invests me in Emma and Knightley, and that is that the snow is coming down. They're visiting the Westons. Snow is coming down. Emma's father is getting very
Christmas
antsy.
Eve.
Christmas Eve. And
it's
someone
Christmas
comes in.
Eve, 1820, whatever.
Right. The Christmas of what?
Set the scene.
That's right. Someone comes in, Mr. John. Well, I won't even say his name because it'll be confusing to people who haven't read the book. Anyway, someone comes in and says, "It's snowing outside. Oh my God. Are we going to be able to get home in the carriages?" And what happens is Mr. Knightley immediately goes out, looks at the roads, comes back in, and tells Mr. Woodhouse, who is freaking out, that there's nothing to worry about. And then he has this exchange with Emma, and it only has to be a few words. And they sort of look at each other, and he says, "Your father will not be easy. Why do you not go?" And she's like, "Yes, I completely agree. Let's order the carriages." And they just take care of it. And managing people who have anxiety, and there's another even better passage that we'll talk about next time. What I wanted to say about Austen is that I think of Austen and all these real little characters and all these little bits of conversation. If you think of an author creating a dollhouse, right? Every author creates a little tiny world for you to peer into. And if you think of it as a dollhouse, every author would have a different way of constructing it and a stylized way of making it. So for example, if you looked at Dickens and his dollhouse, every character would be a caricature, not a picture of a real person. It would be Ebenezer Scrooge or Uriah Heep or, Mr. Micawber or whatever. Everybody has an oversized, bigger than life personality, for example. And many other authors, we could say, what their quirks are. When you look at Austen's dollhouse, you see your life rendered in exact detail, even down to like the toothpaste spit on the window, all of the tiny flaws that everybody has, all of the tiny moments that happen that you have in your life, and you sort of react to those. That's the triumph of Emma. It's one of the reasons why it's a masterpiece, is it paints, using these little conversational exchanges, paints such a amazingly detailed picture of your life. And I think
for me, and like I said earlier, this is a common theme that we have talked about, is how one of the geniuses of Jane Austen and why she is so long beloved in the canon of English writers is that even now her characters are people that you know. Mm-hmm. They are real people. They are people that we still know. And for me, more than any of the books that we have talked about or that I have read of hers, Emma, every character, no matter secondary characters, even tertiary characters, every person is fully realized and is not, even Miss Bates, who is kind of the most caricaturous of them all, and I don't think that's a word, I think I just made it up. Yeah. She is kind of the most ridiculous because of the way she speaks. But there are people like that, and we all know them. Hell, I am probably that person for a lot of people, where my dialogue would go on and on for page after page. No. Every single character in that book is a real person, and we all know people who are like that. And so when you're reading, I mean, we just had like a 15-minute discussion about Frank Churchill, good guy or bad guy.
Yeah, right.
even he is so fully realized. Yeah. That we have had different interpretations of the type of person he is.
Yes. And the heating just kicked on in my home, which means that there will be horrible white noise on the rest of this recording. So it's a great time to cut it off, wind it up. So,
do we have any old business or listener mail?
We don't have any listener mail.
Nobody sent us any questions?
No.
Why don't you love us? Alicia, why didn't you send us any mail? We have an email address. Kristen, tell the public about our email address.
Yes, our email address is firstimpressionspodcast@gmail.com. And you can use the dots or not. It's first.impressions.podcast@gmail.com, but Gmail will take it either way. So
Gmail will take it any way you want it.
Any way you want it. And, maybe some of the scenes we talked about today, maybe I'll be able to take the MP3 of this Hangouts on Air, splice in some scenes so it will make it even better. So I hope I'm able to do that. And I don't think I have any other old business except for thank you, everybody who has listened to our podcast. You are amazing.
Yes, thank you. It's very exciting. I mean, we basically do this because we both find it interesting. And there's no hope of celebrity or of anyone even listening. So the fact that people are enjoying it is really gratifying. It's kind of a nice little treat. Yeah. So please do send us questions, though. I think it would be really cool to get some questions from the public about Emma or just anything Austen related. And before we leave, I have to do my usual description of my wine. So this is the Kirkland signature Costco brand.
Kirkland has some good wine. I am not going to dump on Kirkland.
Sonoma County Chardonnay. And I just want to say it's quite good. Here's the thing about Costco. I think I heard this on NPR. They are actually the #1 distributor of wine in the world. Mm. So if Costco picks up a wine and puts it in their store, it's going to sell and be huge. And we can joke all we want about, Costco brand, blah, blah. This is good. And it was like $7. So I don't have any shame. I'm obviously not. I'm putting it out there for all 300 of our listeners, all 300 members of my mom's Torah study group.
We respect your taste, and I have had some excellent Kirkland wine. So Alrighty, here's
So
to you, Maggie.
the Idaho wine that you made us drink was not so much, but whatever.
Well, tell me how you really feel.
Okay, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. Hopefully the sound quality and everything on this will be okay. On the East Coast watching Netflix right now, so that's why the network's a little slow.
Yeah, get off Netflix, guys. We had to do our Hangouts on air. Don't degrade our audio quality. So,
yes.
Alrighty, I'm going to stop
watching Making a Murderer.
Yeah, right. Alrighty, okay. Thanks, and bye, I guess.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.